Lasses of the pipe smokers of Ireland. Hello again. This is part two of, or part three of a series on the book of Ecclesiastes. Um, and really need to listen to the first two, I think, because I don't want to have to keep going back and redefining the key words to a book that if you don't know these key words and they're understanding the book in this code that is a part of the book of Ecclesiastes, you're going to get very depressed. Because for those that don't understand it, it's the most depressing, pessimistic book there is. It can lead to despair, perhaps even aided in the suicide of Ernest Hemingway, whose life work seemed to look at things through the perspective of the understood or misunderstood book of Ecclesiastes. Me, on the other hand, did just the opposite. I see in that book such great hope, such good stuff that gives me purpose in life, the kind of stuff that hobbits would love and philosophers would love. To enjoy life as much as you possibly can, but with a sober template that gives you a sense of self-restraint because of something else in your mind you understand about enjoying life. The person that gets to understand the person that understands the book of Ecclesiastes will enjoy life more than anybody ever. And they will enjoy life with this understanding. Enjoy it like Solomon enjoyed it, with their mind intact, with their wisdom intact, without ever giving themselves over thoroughly to the pursuit of pleasure, but pursuing pleasure with something else in mind that gives them a sense of deep appreciation. They're able to live in the now without being in a hurry to acquire more the fastest way they can, which we talked about last week. People that are not reconciled to death and who think somehow that death is negotiable. Which is the way most of my countrymen in America live, as if it was negotiable. To those kind of people, they can't ever really enjoy anything. Because they're trying to outrun the day of their death by experiencing the highest of the highs as much as they can, as fast as they can. Therefore, they're cursed with an insatiable appetite that always looks for more, never satisfied. They never reach the state of ataraxia. So I talked about my concept or my title for the sermon on this series in chapter 2 of Ecclesiastes, the snowman, a snowman in hell, or snowman, excuse me, in paradise. And basically the word paradise was a play on a word in talking about existentialism, and it's called the Hedonist Paradox. A snowman in paradise is a paradox because he's in paradise, but he can't enjoy it for very long because the heat and the sun and the balminess of Hawaii or Bermuda or wherever else you might think, even ultimately the Garden of Eden would have melted him in a matter of seconds. So it's sort of like one of my favorite movies is The Waking of Ned Devine, in which Ned wins the lottery. He's watching it on TV and he wins the lottery, and the shock of winning the lottery causes him to have a fatal heart attack right then and there. Oh, it's like that's basically the hedonist paradox. That's a snowman's experience of paradise. It's the doom of anyone who thinks that utopia is something that can finally be experienced here, that Ponce de Leon's fountain of youth can be found, that Midas touch will not curse you. They're looking for the ultimate symbol of ataraxia, which we talked about in the first of this series a couple weeks ago. Ataraxia is basically a philosophical term that means peace of mind, contentment, true satisfaction, getting to the place where you really are settled with the fact that if I don't get any more than what I have right now, that's just fine with me, man. I'm going to enjoy my mug of beer. I'm going to enjoy my good scotch and a nice cigar or pipe. I'm going to enjoy the woman I have, and I'm going to find significance in what I do. Ataraxia. Let's talk about the hedonist paradox. I think that's what I left you with last week. The hedonist paradox basically is the fact that we are cursed with an insatiable appetite. We need more to stay euphoric, to keep the meaning of a pleasurable experience. Like the mythical Sisyphus, we're cursed with futility. With the end result of all of our pursuits to be happy and try to attain happiness, basically, which means we are not there yet, and we're striving for more, and we're toiling for more of whatever. We can't live in the now. That whole thing is a life of futility. It's meaningless. At the end, all of our striving and toil, we're going to look back and think, what really have I ever accomplished? What was I ever satisfied with? Sisyphus, as you know, is pushing a rock up the mountain. Once he gets just right to where the peak he thought was, he stumbles and the rock falls down. He crashes down, and he has to begin that trip over and over and over again, only to find himself back down again and cursed with the fact that he'll never reach the top. He'll never attain nirvana. He'll never achieve utopia. He'll never be able to enjoy paradise. It's all in the end meaningless. It was all a pursuit that was unworthy. It was doomed from the very beginning. Nothing is substantial, nothing is truly weighty, nothing is really worth or valued. In the end, it all fades. In fact, it fades just a few days after we've experienced it. We have to get something else to get us high again, only to find out it fades just a few moments afterward, just a few days afterward, or weeks afterward. It doesn't do it for us anymore. We got to get more. Got to get higher. Solomon said it like this: what I thought would be weighty, or what I thought would be cement, whatever I thought would cement the deal, man, in terms of my gullibility, my naivete that convinced me that one day I'm going to get there being ataraxia. One day I'm going to get there. One day I'm going to get enough money to do this, or one day I'm going to do that, or there's an experience out there of pleasure or of entertainment, of building, of working, of acquiring as many sexual adventures as I can, and I'm finally going to get to the place where it's like, oh man, if I never have anything else, this was worth it. He's saying, I tried to cement that deal with pleasure. I looked for something to be substantial and solid and weighty and durable. It turned out to be, in the end, a vapor cloud, man. It turned out to be mist. It turned out to be steam. It was as substantial as air. I mean, he built monuments. He built stuff out of gold, man. Where are they today? We don't have any monuments that are still up that Solomon built. Where are they? They turned out to be air. They turned out to be vapor, mist. Not durable, unendurable. To the hedonist, evil and good were defined in terms of pleasure and pain. And therefore, the ultimate goal in our short life under the sun was to avoid pain and to pursue pleasure, to find things that stir up the limbic system in our brain that holds the emotions of pleasurable experiences and files them away and is there for us to try to achieve again and again and again, only to find that that same memory of that pleasure, when re-experienced, doesn't get the same thing. And so those pleasure centers of our brain that provides that strong, the experience of pleasure, man, that supplies some of the greatest pain-killing drugs in our system. Oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine. That's why they call it dope. And therefore, the strongest amounts of pleasure, the highest amounts of pleasure that we can experience, provide the kind of chemicals that are neurotransmitters in our brain that, if we could squeeze them out in drug form, would provide the greatest analgesics, the greatest painkillers. And so you end up inevitably experiencing not the pleasure that you thought would get you ataraxia, but you end up experiencing, at least for the hedonist paradox, the hedonist pursuing pleasure to avoid pain ends up with the one thing that he was trying to avoid. What's that? Pain. That's odd. Why is that? Well, it is that because you are by nature insatiable. You cannot ever reach the state of being fully filled. You can't ever get sated. You can't ever be satisfied. You can't ever be content. Yada, yada, yada. Living like a hedonist. Striving for ataraxia in that way inevitably will lead you to anorexia, not ataraxia. Alcoholism, gluttony, sexual addiction, and the like. That's what you'll get. They're all painful. If we could have the one term that encapsulates the horror of a hedonist, encapsulates the word pain, it would be boredom. Boredom is painful. Perhaps psychologically it's the greatest pain that a person can experience for very long. In fact, boredom is the leading cause of insanity and suicide. It's the curse of the hedonist. The same amount of the greatest pleasure over time becomes the source of the greatest banality. Boredom leads to depression, disillusionment, insanity, suicide. It's what gives prison its bad name. Prison wouldn't be so bad if it wasn't for boredom. Boredom contains a restriction or a limit, a containment on my ability to pursue more pleasure. And as a result, it consigns me with a perpetual existence of experiencing in my limbic system, in my memory, the same amount of pleasure until it's no longer pleasurable but becomes a source of boredom. Feel me? Boredom is pain. To exist in the Sisyphean state of futility and meaningless and despair. That's the greatest nightmare of a hedonist. It's the hedonist hell. The Rolling Stones sing about this. You can't always get what you want. The Eagles sang about this in Hotel California. You can check in at any time, but you can't ever leave. You are contained. Whatever's there may thrill you at the moment, but over time it will lead to the pain of boredom, despair, insanity, suicide. That's why that's the hedonist conclusion. The conclusion of pessimistic existentialism is suicide. Once you reach the existentialist conclusion, you become an espouser of the existentialist motto, life is meaningless. And that conclusion and the despair that it leads to is the consequence of making the pursuit of more and more pleasure, greater amounts of pleasure, as fast as you possibly can in the short period of time you have on this earth. That's the consequence. Despair. Ayn Rand, or Ayn Rand if you prefer, the atheist philosopher, once said, you can avoid reality, but you cannot avoid the consequences of avoiding reality. Reality is boredom. Right there, my pipe smoking group would go on for 4 or 5 hours on that one. Huh. There's a famous story in the New York Times, gosh, maybe 30, 40 years ago, about a man in the 1920s who was scaling the Empire State Building. That was his pursuit. That was his Sisyphean pursuit. Going to climb the highest mountain in the world, highest building in the world at the time. Mountain climber, it would be Mount Everest. He was stuck on the skyscraper and looking for a handhold. He saw a spider web, but he thought it was a chunk of cement. And he leaned his whole weight on over to grab that life-saving handhold to get to the next descent, and found out too late it was a spider web. Nothing to catch him. He plummeted to his death. Insubstantial. Unworthy of the pursuit. The fact of the matter that most people don't understand, because of years and years of the religious discipline of asceticism, of living like a monk, living like a hermit, the disciplines of Buddhism, for instance, of extreme self-denial, of withdrawing from all sensual pleasures of life, not sniffing them out as Solomon said he did. Years and years of that have led people to believe that to live a life of devotion to God means to deny pleasure. Deny yourself sensual happiness. Live like a celibate, eat very little, and whatever you eat, don't enjoy it. This is a lie, and it's not biblical. It certainly is not a Christian posture that's endorsable by Scripture. Believe it or not. In fact, God, the God of the Bible, wants us to attain the state of ataraxia. And the Scriptures give the secret of attaining ataraxia, contentment, enjoyment of life. And if you want to know that thoroughly, I'll be posting, I may have already posted my sermon, the second sermon in the series on Ecclesiastes, A Snowman in Paradise. If you care to go to it now, you can go to thelegacychurch.net, click under media, then podcasts, and you'll see the meaning of life, part 1 and 2. Get the album on part 1 and second sermon, Snowman in Paradise. But let me give you the short answer if you don't want to have to go and listen to me preaching. The short answer is, let me quote the greatest theologian in America. The greatest American theologian is arguably Jonathan Edwards. Jonathan Edwards was known to be, a hellfire brimstone preacher. He is famous for the singular sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. And it said people in his church, when he preached that sermon, were hanging on to the pillars of the church for fear the floor was going to open up and swallow them into the flames of hell. Powerful. This guy would be he'd be the last theologian I'd think to look to find out about how to experience pleasure and happiness. But this is what he wrote, lest people misunderstood him. He wrote, I am resolved to endeavor to obtain for myself as much happiness under the sun or in the world as I am possibly, or as I can possibly obtain with all the might and all the power, all the vigor, all the vehemence, yea, with all the violence I am capable of, or can bring myself to exert in any way that can be thought of. Wow! So obviously some people are missing something. You might be asking yourself, am I missing something? That's one of the greatest biblical theologians in America, and he said that. C.S. Lewis, I think one of the great Irish philosophers, he said, it is a Christian's duty, as you know, for everyone to be as happy as he can. And Solomon said it like this. In his conclusion that everything's meaningless, he then says, a man can do nothing better than to eat and to drink and to find ataraxia, satisfaction, in whatever his hand finds to do. This too, he says, is from the hand of God. For without God, who can exist and find true enjoyment? To the man who pleases God, God gives to that man the wisdom and the knowledge basically the know-how and the ability to enjoy happiness or ataraxia. Basically, if God created us to be happy, if He created us for enjoyment of life, then He is the central number in that equation, man. Without our Creator giving us that ability, we cannot overcome the second law of thermodynamics, which is entropy. And entropy is the curse upon all creation, including man. We are not built for paradise. Like a snowman, we cannot exist in a state of utopia or satisfaction or pleasure on our own without something happening to us that redesigns us, man, for pleasure. Without being redesigned for pleasure and happiness, we cannot ever truly enjoy it for very long. And we are consigned to the striving and the fervor and the frantic pace so many of us at one time kept in the pursuit of ataraxia. But when we're right with God, and when we know it, when our heart is right with God, when we have peace with God, this isn't a sermon. I'm giving you a philosophy here. I'm giving you the conclusion of Solomon's study. With God, being right with God, we experience the pipe smoker's nirvana, man. We experience the lifestyle of Middle Earth, of Hobbiton. We become happy. We get to enjoy maybe not the highest pleasures there are out there, but we're not pursuing that. We're happy with the simple pleasures of life, and we grow content, and we're able to live in the now. That's what a pipe does. It grounds us in the now. We can sit with a group of guys and gals and be right there in the moment, in the now, with them, enjoying them, without thinking about the future, without thinking about tomorrow. We're grounded right then in the now. Pipe smokers are geared, I think, more than anyone else in the world, with the right atmosphere in which to pursue those things that inevitably will conclude that life was worth living. It was significant. That our happiness was not sinful. Our experience of pleasure was not sinful because it wasn't driven by the sinner's paradox of life is short and I've got to beat the time clock and get all I can. What's the beer commercial say? You only go around once in life. This is a secular life. They deny the transcendent. It's the secular humanist motto, the Michelob motto. You only go around once in life. There's nothing else after that. So grab for all the gusto you can. But you know, the paradox is, in living life like that, you never get to enjoy all the gusto you can. Powerful, man. It is a life-changing truth. The hedonist paradox. Wow, boredom. I'm sorry for long periods of silence, but I still get stalled out thinking of the ramifications, the implications, the disillusionment that comes with at first buying the illusion that some have made the American dream to be. I don't know about you in Ireland and what the bottom line philosophy is. Do you live a slower life? I'd like to imagine my countrymen in Ireland, at least in the villages, have learned to live a more rural, content life. I don't know about those of you that are Scottish or English or Herman, those of you guys there in Germany. But I'd like to know. Leave your comments. Look forward to the discussion. It was a high pleasure to be with you guys and gals. Until next we meet, Slancha. Take care.